Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay, good. I was having audio difficulties. Well, welcome to today's charter chat, as we're calling it. Today, we will be discussing the governance charter as it pertains to the HARA. And last week, we talked about governance and membership. If you happen to miss that session, a recording has been sent out by email. So feel free to view that at your leisure. Today, we also have Vicki Schultz with us, who is with Catholic Charities, our current HARA. So she's here as a resource should there be any questions directed to her. And then we also have Polly Shepard, who is our consultant, who has been working with us diligently for the past year to produce this governance charter. The charter itself is more than 60 pages long, and we thought it would be helpful for the community to break down the charter into four sections that represent big changes that we wanted to make sure that we got right in the charter. And so that's the purpose of these four sessions that we're having. Feel free to read the other portions of the charter. We want everybody to be knowledgeable and have an understanding of what's in there. So feel free to do that when you have time to do so. When it comes to the structure for today's meeting, we're going to have Polly do her presentation. It's probably 20 to 30 minutes long. We're going to ask if you have any questions at all, that you put them in the chat and or reserve them until the end, and we'll get to them. That's so that we can make sure we get through the content of the presentation in a timely manner, but also so that there's a good flow to the conversation, particularly for those who will view this at a later date. We will also be issuing an FAQ, so any questions that are asked in the session, we'll also summarize those and put those out as a frequently asked questions document. So if I have not missed anything, we're going to turn things over to Polly, get her presentation queued up, and hopefully get ourselves out of here within the hour.
Sounds good. Thank you very much, Essence. Just so you know, I'm taking notes down by my side, so I'm not looking away or ignoring anyone, but I'm just trying to take notes as well. So Angela, as always, is queuing up our PowerPoint that hopefully summarizes a lot of things. I believe that you were all sent out the full draft charter. So you have the actual words. We're going to try to summarize it today. And we know there are some changes to that draft already. So, you know, your input is essential, and we're looking forward to your questions and your input. So we can go to the next slide, I think. The process today, we just want to remind everybody kind of how this has been building to this point. We have this governance work group that is we've been meeting every other week at least, sometimes more. Working through the charter section by section. And as you know, there's sort of a lot of interdependencies and some dominoes. So there's a lot of iteration that's required and has been really helpful. So we started a year ago. We've presented fairly regularly to the Governance Council and several times to the general membership to give people a sense of what we're doing, how we're doing, and the progress we're making, and asked for input with surveys and breakout sessions and such. So the next slide. So the goals of the charter are fairly simple. We're trying to really communicate a structure and a process that works best for Flint and Genesee counties. So we know that we're doing the day-to-day and we're putting out fires and we're building things as we go, but we started out with trying to reconcile two documents you had of some bylaws that were adopted in 2018 and a charter in 2019, but there were inconsistencies between them and still some gaps. So we wanted to try to just get everything in writing so you all would be able to understand the charter. It would all be transparent and it would stand the test of time as leadership changes or people transition from agencies, but the agencies continue. So we've been trying in this process to maximize your input. It's trying to write a document that is high on objectivity and evidence-based decision-making. Collaboration continues to be important, focused on community needs, doing more planning, and then successful execution and implementation. The processes and procedures and entities we're trying to structure are intended to minimize conflicts of interest and any confusion. And we're requesting that all participants commit to a code of conduct, which includes a conflict of interest disclosure on a regular basis. We want to make sure that all the processes in the charter and in your work are fair, transparent, consistent, and compliant with funding requirements. But we're trying to build in flexibility to that structure and just things that make sense no matter what the funder says or who the funders are as things change. Our community still needs a collaborative network to address homelessness. So those are the goals of the charter rewrite process. In terms of the HARA in this particular charter chat, there are two things that have changed from sort of current practice and the previous documents. One is that we've added a request for proposal process, a competitive one that will affect all of the entities that are contracted by the CoC. So the lead agency, or which we're possibly now going to call the infrastructure organization, the HARA, the collaborative applicant, if we have one that's different from any of those, and the HMIS administrator. Once the RFP and a competitive process has been accomplished, we're requiring that every entity have a memorandum of understanding with the governance council. The other major change in this section is that on the governance council, we're proposing to have designated and undesignated seats. There would be term limits for the officers and for those undesignated seats. And the HARA would be one of the entities with a designated seat. So the designated seats are those organizations that are essentially permanently always going to be part of a homelessness community-wide process, and they don't have term limits. They would appoint a person to represent the organization on the governance council. The HARA would be one, the HMIS administrator would be one, and the lead agency would be one. So we're hoping that would mean that each one of those agencies would attend every governance council meeting to be informed and to share input on a really timely basis. But they would not have a vote because of conflicts of interest. So we'll go over those changes in greater detail, but those are the two biggies. So each section has sort of a philosophy general principles section. This is the one for the HARA, the highlights. So because MISHTA sort of sets up HARAs, not every CoC across the country has exactly a HARA. They may have an organization like it. We're saying that consistent with the MISHTA guidelines, communities designate an agency to serve as the HARA for their network. So we're using the MISHTA definition in their guidelines to sort of enable the creation of the HARA. The MISHTA rules also state that the HARA is the only entity that can qualify an applicant for the homeless preference needed for subsidized housing through MISHTA. So one of their key roles, according to MISHTA, and clearly for us to get funding as a community, is that we do this. Their rules also say that the HARA provides centralized intake and housing assessment on behalf of the CoC. Now we've talked about this a number of times, and a number of people are confused enough about what's the difference between coordinated entry and centralized intake and housing assessment that we're forming a small work group to work through a workflow for our community. So this particular bullet may change, but that's currently exactly word for word what it says in the MISHTA rules. So we've got to figure out how to draw a distinction between that and coordinated entry. So I know you may have questions about this, but you're welcome to come join us when we try to put it in different words and do a flow chart. And the general membership will vote on the designated agency to be the community's HARA. So once we go through that request for proposal process, then the general membership will be asked to select a designated agency from the applicants. And that's how that process will happen. The vote and the voice remains with the general membership. Each section for the contracted entities, as I call them, that's not exactly what they're called, but um, has a eligibility and a selection process. So the HARA may be a nonprofit or it could be a municipality, and they are different across the state. Again, they'll be selected by the general membership following this competitive review. The governance council will make a recommendation. So they'll do one look through all the competitive responses, make a recommendation. And that will be based on a review by the independent review team. So one of the new pieces of our structure is the independent review team. And we've talked about that at the general membership meetings. But that's sort of a group of people that will be selected again by the general membership. They will do a completely independent review, make a recommendation. The governance council will look at those recommendations and forward them on to, with comment if they have comments, or if they disagree, but both will go on to the general membership for the general membership to analyze and vote. The governance council will consult with the general membership to develop a policy and procedure for selecting the HARA, including criteria. So that'll be a separate document, and the policy manual won't be in the charter down in the weeds, other than to say that there will be one. We're also putting in the charter that the RFP should be issued at least every 5 years. It can happen more often, but at least every 5 years for all of the contracted entities. And again, an MOA will be negotiated and signed by an officer of the CoC who would be delegated by the general membership with that authority, the selected agency, and Genesee County, since Genesee County gives us sort of the legal standing to accept the funds, since the CoC is not a legal entity. Did I say that right, Angela? Okay, next slide. So their roles and responsibilities of the HARA are numerous, and they're delineated again in the MISHDA ESG rules and procedures, but this is a summary. That they work collaboratively to ensure access to resources based on assessed need. So there's a whole bunch of steps that allow that to happen. Ensuring access, I mean, to ensure access is a lot of work, understanding the resources and understanding the needs, a lot of work steps in there. Again, here's the tricky part, but provide centralized intake and housing assessment, practices shelter diversion, and works to rapidly rehouse people who are homeless. They're required to use the HMIS for client data and use that information to provide services and make appropriate referrals. And they're responsible for ensuring quality service delivery and practice strength-based case management. Those are all in the MISHDA rules and in your previous documents. The HARA works with all partner agencies to ensure coordinated entry systems are working effectively. Again, that's back to that workflow we got to try to put on paper. The HARA assists the community in promoting access to and effective use of mainstream programs, optimizing individual and family self-sufficiency. They oversee compliance and efficiencies of any programs that helps fund. They sometimes have some sub-grantees, and they're responsible if they give someone money to do part of the work, and it's MISHDA funding that to ensure that that sub-grantee complies. And we're asking that they participate actively as a member of the governance council. And in the charter, active participation is defined as attending 75% at least of regularly scheduled meetings. They'll have a designated non-voting seat and will designate an appropriate and knowledgeable representative. Next slide, I think. The HARA will be responsible to the CoC and reports through the governance council. And the performance criteria and evaluation process will be included in the MOA. Our fourth charter session chat is going to be focused completely on performance evaluation processes because they're written in throughout the charter. So the HARA will be have its own applicable process. They're responsible to MISHDA for the funding they get from MISHDA, obviously. participate in their monitoring and reporting requirements to ensure coordinated funding for this work in our community. Any sanctions for performance problems will be included in the MOA and termination clauses, both if the agency who has the MISTA funding chooses to terminate or if the CoC chooses to terminate. Record retention hasn't been addressed in the documents before, and we want to make sure that we address that. MISTA has some specific record retention. I know some of their records must be retained for 3 years, others for 5 after the funding ends. So whoever the HARA is responsible for maintaining those records. And they must have a confidentiality policy in place. Any transition from one agency to another requires a plan in place at least 30 days prior to the transition date. So that'll also be in the MOA. But we need to create a template plan, and that'll be part of our ongoing work, so that all of the pieces and parts that we need to plan for and in any transition are hopefully thought through and in place before it happens. Next slide. So this is the structure that one of the first things the general membership gave us feedback on. We have the general membership at the top, the contracted entities, of which the HARA is one. The governance council reports to the full membership. The independent review team also reports to the full membership, as do the standing committees. You used to have 10 standing committees. We now have 7, plus the executive committee. So the good news is we consolidated some of the work, and some of the people are the same on some of the committees, so it made sense to combine them. The bad news is there's still just as much work to get done. So that's the structure that's currently in the charter. Next slide. So again, the 2 big changes in this proposed charter are the RFP MOA process and asking the HARA and the other entities to be members of the governance council and a designated non-voting directorship. Next slide is if you have any questions or comments. I think it's our contact information. So we're open to hearing from you. I'm open anytime, any day. And as I've said before, the governance or general membership meetings, come to your agency and meet with you one-on-one if you need, or and anything we can do to make this the best charter it can be to get the work done. So that's the end of my presentation. I'm open to questions and comments. Let's see if there's any in the chat I should pay attention to.
Not seeing anything in the chat. Does anybody have any questions for Polly or for the rest of us who have been working on this?
There is one comment in the chat. So Bill shared a comment that MISTA requires the centralized intake for funded programs and I'll add, and designates the HARA as that entity. While HUD, and Bill's further comment is that the HUD requires coordinated entry for HUD funded programs. Bill, did you want to elaborate on that comment?
Yeah, because I think that's where, and there was another slide a little later on in the presentation, which I thought was very interesting, by the way, that has to do with who does what. Are we talking about the MISTA programs connecting with coordinated entry? There was a slide in there that says they are. That's not clearly defined. And we saw that happen and play out way back earlier this year when we were dealing with Ridgefield Court. There, we had heard very clearly, MISTA said that because of the way they define these clients, they didn't have to go through the coordinated entry process, but they did go through the HARA to get assistance. And by the way, they did a very good job. I'm not saying there was anything wrong with the way things went down. I thought it went down very, very well. It's just that when we heard that, and I heard it loud and clear, then we need a very clear understanding or a clear delineation of role and responsibility here between the two. I understand very clearly, MISTA says we want our programs to be clearly organized and coordinated in the delivery of services. We figured that out with homeless prevention. That's why we picked, in essence, at the time, the Shelter of Flint and now Catholic Charities to do homeless prevention and G-Card rather than going to 5 different agencies. Okay, so I think we need to look at that and be very clear in the way we set this up. But I saw that on the slides, and I think, again, we need to be very clear with how we do things. Thank you, Angela, for picking that up. But that was the concern that I have.
You bring up a
Say-
great point, Bill. I think that there is, with HUD in particular, when we think about the categories, right, how HUD delineates categories of homelessness, oftentimes HUD programs will not allow eligible costs unless someone is considered category 1 or literally homeless. Keep in mind the function and the purpose of the HARA is to support families prior to homelessness, right? So whether there's eviction diversion or eviction homelessness prevention, the HARA functions as a referral agency to stabilize housing, not just address homelessness. And so sometimes I think that's where you get a variation between coordinated entry and stabilized intake.
And I think if I could just add on one more comment here, is we need to really look at the screening process. A lot of this goes right back to the homeless outreach teams who do the screening and referring clients both to the HARA and also to the coordinated entry process, or who go through coordinated entry and saying, based upon their scores and resources that they have, they can benefit from the services offered through the HARA and through homeless prevention. I think maybe we need to talk about that and step back a little further as to what we're doing. Those are just my thoughts and the way I'm seeing things kind of played out at this point in time anyway. When we're getting referrals for clients that have income, I have a question about that one because our programs are designed to address clients who have the greatest needs, who don't have the resources. So therefore, these are homeless prevention dollars that I think should be appropriately addressed using the HARA. Those are my thoughts, folks. Thank you.
That's helpful. And we have just, one of the things I discovered a while ago is that there aren't enough people at the table who clearly understand the difference between centralized intake and coordinated entry, at least in a way that can consistently say it to me. And so we're going to meet and try to do a workflow of every possible scenario of how anybody might get in the system, how they're going to get dealt with, who's doing what, so we can put it in writing, because the words sound really similar to me, but I understand there's lots of functions that go under those words. So we hear you, and we got to deal with that next.
Yeah, I think that'll be exceedingly helpful because we do have, coordinated entry policies and procedures that, again, are, I don't know, 20 some pages long, right? But at a glance, what do you do when you have a person who presents in this way? How do they flow through the system? I think that will be really helpful for everybody. It sounds like, Vicki, you would like to say something?
Yeah, yesterday I sent Polly, I didn't even, all the program manual for MISHDA has been revised and updated as of October. So I don't know, Polly, if that's where you pulled some stuff from, but I sent it to you yesterday, and I sent some other comments that Michelle Edwards made, because every county, obviously, Michelle's on now. Every county is different, and I know that's the problem, is that the wording tries to make it fit for every county, and that's not the case. And that's what Michelle was trying to explain to me yesterday. We're unique because we have the coordinated entry at one location and HARA at the other. So when it comes to centralized intake, I think that's where I got hung up, because we have been told that, centralized intake, I thought that meant the SPDAT and the CESA, and I thought all that takes place for anyone who's homeless through coordinated entry. And I know Bill gave a definition of what HUD wants, but then again, we're not HUD funded. So does that mean, I don't know what that means. So I think this work group is very important, because I think we all have our own definitions of what some of that means. But we got to sort through it, because coordinated entry was added after the fact that HARA's been around for years and years. So is the wording exactly appropriate? I'm not sure at this point. And I know, like I said, Michelle just jumped on now, and she's still trying to help get clarity in my head. because we've been told that long as it's homeless or whatever, they go through coordinated entry. And we've been trying for over a year now to streamline that and figure out what number do we tell them to call? Where do we tell them to go?
Yeah, I appreciate that. And it's, Michelle, if you have anything you want to add, I hear the difficulty, and from my particular facilitator independent point of view, I don't care what it is. I only care that you guys know what it is and that it's clear and in writing. And right now it doesn't seem to be. And I get the difficulty. So I just thought, let's get together, let's walk it through. It may take us 15 hours to do the flow chart, but once done, we should know what we're doing.
Right. But I think that is the confusion. See, that normally in all my other communities, the coordinated entry system, the coordinated entry process is at the HARA. Because you guys have a separate system. You have the coordinated entry kind of separate from the HARA. The HARA should play a role within that coordinated entry system. So therefore, all your homeless people are coming through coordinated entry first, right? And then they're being referred out to everyone that has rapid rehousing or PSH, correct?
Well, we don't know for sure.
I mean, is that the idea of what your coordinated entry is supposed to look like in Genesee County, right? So if that's how it's supposed to look, I think it's going through Metro. All homeless people go through Metro, and then Metro has the by name list, and they put people on a rapid rehousing list and the PSH. Well, you guys say it's the same, but you know, I'm saying it separately just for my purposes of interpreting that. Rapid rehousing and PSH, you guys have a wait list, a by name list for that. So all your homeless clients are coming through there. And then you guys are forwarding them to whoever has openings within in their program based on their SPDAT and whatever other criteria you are using to prioritize, correct? Okay, I see you guys nodding your head. So if that's the process, then yes, the HARA would not be the only AC that's your prioritization and assessment, because your CESA, everybody's doing a CESA, right? So even if they show up at your shelters, they're all doing the CESA. So your CESA is your assessment tool that's being used to assess all your clients that's homeless through your system. And if that's the case, to me, the assessment is being done by everyone, but the coordinated entry process is through Metro. The HARA just plays a role in that process. And I know in the past, Misha has always said the HARA should do this, the HARA, but because of how people are doing their system, some people have two HARAs because their system is so big, they couldn't just have the one HARA do it. So it depends on your system, how your system flows. And here, because of what happened, Metro now is your coordinated entry because they're the ones who got it up and running, right? And the HARA has the HCV authorization. That's right, what Angela said. So if you guys have, so you have that one HARA that's doing that. So the issue is just making sure that you guys all understand your process, right? And can explain it to someone. And I think that's what you guys are trying to do right now.
Holly,
right?
Can Angela go back to that slide where, you know, I got the problem where it says centralized intake? That was the one. And that's really not the HARA.
No,
the way
you guys don't really have, you guys have a centralized intake based on the coordinated entry for homeless clients.
Okay.
But for prevention clients, there is no centralized intake. Right.
So those first two bullets, or the second and third bullet on what you see, Michelle. I mean, I think there needs to be some tweaking to that bullets.
Provide centralized intake. Yeah, because I think it should be the coordinated entry provides the centralized intake. But now your community allows for any agency, well, your shelters, to also do intake and assessment, right? They do the CESA and things. I don't know if you still want to just say the HARA, because it seems like because you have a no wrong door approach, right, in Genesee County, I don't know if it just should be the HARA as your centralized intake, because Metro is your coordinated entry. And I think when you say HARA here, I think in the past, because the coordinated entry is normally with the HARA, that's why they say the HARA. But you guys have your HARA and system separate, right? Your coordinated system separate. So I think it should say probably your coordinated entry system or your coordinated entry process or system provides that centralized intake for homeless clients. Because remember, you don't have a centralized intake for prevention clients. This would just be for your homeless clients, correct?
Correct.
I mean, that's how I'm seeing it for you guys. If you guys think I'm wrong, please tell me, because you guys are the only one to have a separate system. And there's nothing wrong with it. I'm not saying there's nothing wrong with it. This is just how your system is flowing here in Genesee County.
So I think that's really helpful, Michelle. I think what we need to be mindful of too is that there is a way that we're doing things today.
Right.
And then there's probably a gap between that and the desired state. I think that many communities have moved to a different model. And if you're saying that we're the only community that does it this way, we need to understand how we're doing it today, how others are doing it, and whether or not we want to continue in this regard.
Okay.
You know, so I think that's something that the conversation continues on that. And what is included, it comes from Polly's review and assessment of, you know, those guiding documents as to how we're supposed to function. So I don't know if we want to continue to be the anomaly, if it could be streamlined, and if we don't think it's working. If it is working and we become the poster child and the model for how everybody else should be doing it, then that's fine. But I think we need to have more conversation and dialogue specifically about that. And I know that some of those conversations are happening.
Yeah, and I don't think you have to, it's not that this is how everybody should be doing. I think it's just based on your community need and your community process, right? So when you guys took over, I was around when Metro, before Metro became the centralized or coordinated entry, because funding was somewhere else. It was at the HARA at one point, but it never took off for a couple of years. So therefore Metro took the reins and took it back, and they decided to do that coordinated entry system. So I don't think it was something that your system just did on a whim or something. It had to be done because you weren't doing it, and it was a HUD requirement, right? So therefore Metro took that role or took that lead, because at the time your HARA was not doing it, and it was in the process of changing. So I think Metro picked it up and took the reign and just moved with it. Now, I'm not saying you got to change that. You know, if it's working and you just need to probably tweak it a little bit, then I think I don't think you should have to change if it's not warranted in your community. It's just up to your community. We're not saying it has to be at the HARA. We're just saying that because of things that happen in your community, you changed that process because it wasn't happening. And so you guys had to be in line with your HUD money. This is a HUD requirement to have coordinated entry created. MISTA also required it because it is a HUD requirement. That's why MISTA requires it. But it's really just based on how your community needs. So I'm not saying any way is the right way or the wrong way. So don't think that you're doing it the wrong way just because you're the only agency doing it or only community. But there might be other communities that have tweaked theirs a bit too. Like I said, I have one that has 2 HARAs because that's how their process is working. They have, you know, they split it up a little bit. So it's not saying it's wrong. It's just trying to figure out what's best for your community. So don't think you guys have to go and change it because you're the only community doing it. I don't want you to take that from this conversation, but more that it had to happen and it had to be done. So Metro stepped up to do it. And now we're just trying to figure out if that's how you guys want to keep it, or do you want that change? And if it's not needed, don't do it. But if you guys are working it and it's able to be done, I don't see a problem with it. It's just trying to figure out what language you want to have, right? It's just about the language. Right now you have it as the HARA provides the centralized intake when that's really not happening at your CoC. And we're not saying you have to change it, but just get your process to the point that you can tell us what the process is. And so I can have that for my records in your coordinated entry policy.
Thank you for that, Michelle. And thank you for joining us this morning. This has been a great dialogue. When we think about the governance charter and what really motivated the work was really to get this type of clarity and to build a system where it is clear that the community is driving the choices made. Right. And so I thank you for that. I do think, you know, as we've talked in community, Bill, I see your comment. When we think about the function of the HARA, we don't want it to be just a response to homelessness. We need that prevention and diversion in place. And so I know that's, you know, the impetus of what the HARA is to be. We've seen that with the SARA funds that have come into community, right? It's not enough for us to respond once. And even in our CQI improvement and looking at our system performance measures, we've said as a community, we need to really prioritize diversion and prevention as a means of minimizing the cycle of folks' homelessness. So I think you see that as well. Clearly, we are growing. We still have work to do as far as clarifying, but the goal is to create a document where there's a form and a framework of how we as a community can voice and make choice, so that when it is working, we continue it, but when it's not working, we change it. And so that is the spirit of the document that's being created here.
And I would just like to say, as an outsider who doesn't understand a lot of the processes yet, my concern is that people don't get lost in the cracks and in the gaps and in our lack of clarity about what's happening. So if we can't articulate to people what's exactly the best thing to do and what's going to happen once they do it, we've failed them. So I'm hoping this work group will really be helpful, and we'll talk through all of the issues for as long as it takes until we get it straight. But I do want to clarify one thing with you, Michelle. The HARA or the community won't be at risk of losing ESG funds or MISHDA funds if the HARA isn't the centralized intake and housing assessment.
Yeah. No, that's not the case at all.
Okay, because it uses a lot of stern language in the policy document.
You talking about the new policy document? Yeah. But again, that language is based on the fact that we tweaked that language a little bit, but I think really I'm going to talk to my boss about this a little bit, because you guys did raise some things, because when Vicki shared that part that we do still have in our policy, it does sound kind of confusing based on how your system is set up. Like it is a little different. And again, we are allowing communities to kind of tweak their program or tweak their process within their CoC based on what's best for your CoC or your community. But there's nothing at risk of you guys losing your funding at all. That's not an option. Things is just trying to tweak and understand. And I think just for me, how it helps me to understand better processes is kind of start a flow chart based on what you guys think it is right now, how it's going right now, and then try to tweak it. And then that helps me, and it helps Mitch to kind of understand what you guys are hoping or how you guys wanted it to look. But basically right now you just start from scratch and just say, hey, this is our current flow. And then how can we get to where we're trying to go within that system? And I think that's what this work group is for, it sounds like. So that would be, I think that's helpful, because I know you guys are looking at our process or our policy, but it's really about you guys understanding how your system looks right now, and then trying to get it to where you're trying to get it to go. Like what's your goal of your policy, or what's your goal of your system? And it's really just making sure nobody is lost. Because I had a meeting a couple of weeks ago, or maybe a week ago, with Metro and our HARA about HCV and making sure clients are not being lost that way. And we were finding that clients were being lost a little bit, because you have all these different entry points, right? When it really should just come from coordinated entry, so that everybody understands when you get something from coordinated entry, it's because the client has qualified for homeless services. And so if everybody just sends their referrals to coordinated or any homeless client, they're already sending their CESA and everything to Metro. Therefore, that client and that information should be going to the HARA, so people can get on the wait list, because I don't want them to fall through the crack and never go pull for HCV based on the fact we're pulling right now, right? They've been depleting the wait list and going to the regular wait list because people, they got so many they can pull, so many vouchers right now, which hasn't happened in a while. We didn't pull for like almost a year, it seems like. And now we're pulling rampantly because we have emergency housing vouchers, we have HCV vouchers. And so just making sure that clients are not getting lost. That's the biggest. I think everybody is on the same page, is that we need to make sure you're not losing anyone. And I think that's where the process is kind of muffled or muddled. And that's where clients are being lost at. So just understanding what's the process, what number they're supposed to call. I have a number that I've been giving out here, but I don't know if that's what everybody does. And if it's a different process, please tell me so I can make sure we understand where they're supposed to go first.
Well, and there's, we need to do that, and we need to understand what we're doing, but I'm hoping we'll discover what the bottlenecks are, what the barriers are, and see how to solve those the right way, not just necessarily how we're doing it today. Mm-hmm. So hopefully the group will start with the sort of vision of what we want to have happen and work backwards.
Yeah,
Because we have to make a number of decisions along the way. So
yeah.
So we've scheduled a time to get together. I don't know if you all, Misty and I are gonna, I was trying to meet with her just to do a flow chart so I could understand how it works today. So we're gonna meet next Tuesday at 10 o'clock, I think, Misty.
But okay, so this is my thing. Why are you just meeting with the HARA? Shouldn't you be meeting with
I'm
the
not.
court of entry?
I'm
Oh,
not.
okay,
I
okay.
started with her because we were talking about this presentation.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Okay.
Vicky and Misty and I and Angela were talking about what to do, and everybody said, this is not right, let's figure it out. So,
Yeah.
okay, so what should it be? And then there was no clear answer about what it should be. So we can change the date of the meeting again. I had invited the entire governance work group plus Jim and Ashley. Who are
What time
working
you say? Next Tuesday?
Yeah.
At
We're
10?
gonna
No,
meet,
I thought we were going to combine it with what already existed. Did that change?
combine what with what already existed.
The emails that were going around yesterday. I think they were inviting you, Polly, to join the group they already have between Jim and Ashley.
Oh,
Because
maybe I missed it. I'm sorry.
Ashley did, but she was confused on what this was to do with. Because she has a subcommittee work group and she's on vacation, so she may not have been reading everything thoroughly. Because she comes off vacation, I believe, on Monday.
Yeah.
So we can start over and push it out if we want to. It doesn't matter to me. I just want to get it right with the right people at the table to talk it through. So we had just moved ahead because everybody's chomping at the bit to get this thing done. And then when I go too fast, I go too fast. So we can schedule another date and time if we need to, but the goal is to get the right people at the table, talk about the process and try to figure out what we want it to be, what is best for our community. And if it's what we already got, great. If it's not, let's fix it. But I think it's not quite right at the moment, or we would be able to talk about it and people wouldn't get lost. So I think we have some fixing to do. I don't know what it is or what the solutions are, but that's up to you guys to figure it out. I'll just ask the questions.
Thank you
So-
for that, Polly, and for being willing to kind of be an outsider and trying to gain that understanding to map that out. So thank you for being willing to do that and for coordinating the right people being at the table to have that conversation. And I just want to acknowledge that Ashley has been doing a lot of good work. Jim Perlacki has done a lot of good work. So we're moving in the right direction. And I think your kind of outside perspective will be helpful in just kind of like teasing that out and asking some questions that maybe we wouldn't think to ask because we're all so integrated and so bogged down in what's happening on a day-to-day basis. So thanks for that.
So is next Tuesday too soon? Should we reschedule a different date and time a little farther out and make a broader invitation?
I think if you want people to be able to attend, people need more notice than that.
And
Like, I just
Polly-
know.
I'm sorry, Angela. Polly, you might want to mention that we also, I don't know, are you doing Zoom and in person or just in person?
I need to be in person with somebody because I need to draw it on some easel paper or a whiteboard and scratch it out and change it because
I
just
think
the
that's
word
important.
loses me. I have to have something visual. And I need a flow chart, not just.
And I think Polly, it doesn't sound like this is intended to be like a community-wide broad discussion. You're really trying to capture what are we doing today? What do we have in the charter, like, and where are kind of the bottlenecks at this point? Is the way I understood the task. I think if that's the case, then you would want to have someone from the HARA, you would want to have Erica present, you would want to have Ashley, since she's been working with this work group, and Jim Perlacki as maybe just to kind of get things started, get a draft, and then that may be a discussion point for the broader community. I think sometimes if we have a group of 40 people, then we're going to get pulled in a lot of different directions. We need to be really focused and get the flow chart done.
I think it's very important to include the coordinated entry because it's not just about, I don't want the focus to be the HARA because the HARA is not your main focus of your coordinated entry here. Your coordinated entry is somewhere else. So you need to have them involved, and having Jim Perlecki, I'm sorry, Jim, and Misty and Vicky and the Metro people who are in charge of your coordinated entry, and then someone on the outside who don't know your coordinated entry or think how the coordinated entry is working, so to help you guys kind of see how it's flowing right now. And then you can tweak it as once you get that flow chart started. I think that's what I see. I don't think you want to have a whole lot of people, because right now I don't think you need the shelters involved, because you guys all know what your shelters are supposed to be doing on your coordinated entry. That could just be part of your process, right? But you have to start at the coordinated entry. I feel like you guys are still trying to start with the HARA, but the HARA is not your coordinated entry. So it's still, you're still kind of not separating that the HARA is not your coordinated entry. So your coordinated entry is Metro. So they have to be there. Then the HARA plays a role in that system, right? Because of MISHDA in the HARA. And that's part of your coordinated system, but it's really not, because now you have 2 other agencies that have rapid rehousing, you know, so you have other entities. So really it shouldn't just be the HARA, because the HARA is not your only rapid rehousing provider anymore, right? You have GCYC, and you have another entity that's got rapid rehousing. So they should be involved in this process, because it's not just the HARA anymore, based on the funding that's coming through your system, right? We opened it, allowed you to have other people, my brother's keeper.
I think our issue is, though, Michelle, it's not once we get people on the list, right? So being really specific, like I think we've got a clear process once someone gets on the QB&L list, how they get connected to those resources. The issue is really intake, right? So if we're focusing on where people present and how they get integrated into that system, and whether that system utilizes project-based vouchers or housing choice vouchers or rapid rehousing, the issue isn't the resource, the issue is the intake.
But the intake is still not just the HARA, you know what I mean? Your intake is, I don't know. I see what you guys do. You're trying to see where you are right now and where you guys are trying to go, right? I don't know. But whoever you guys feel should be there to start how your process is right now and kind of explain that flow chart. Because I don't even understand the flow chart, to be honest, or what I think is supposed to work, or what I think is happening. I don't know if that's happening, because based on our conversation last week, I could see the HCV is not really happening for people to get on the list, but they came up with a system, and we're supposed to address that in a month or so and see how it's going. But I think the biggest part is trying to figure out where you are. And I think that's what you guys are talking about, like who should be part of that process. But so it should be the HARA, the coordinated entry, and probably your some COC people like you, Angela, and
street outreach.
And your street outreach team. Yeah. So that starts, and that, I guess that would help you guys come up with your current flow chart of how things are, and then where you're trying to get that flow chart to go. Because I guess you don't have a starting point of a flow chart, right? I could
we could put COC at the top of the chart.
I thought someone sent me a flow chart before, but I could be wrong. I could check.
We've got one that was drafted previously.
Oh, and so that might be a start to help Polly's too, is see your current flow chart, like, and because you guys have something, you're not starting from basically scratch. You do have something to let her see, right?
I think what we have is a difference of what we crafted theoretically and what is actually happening experientially within community. That's the concern, not what's on paper.
Right.
How does it live and move
right now
for the person? And my perspective is this, from the user, right? Because I don't care about the language. I don't care about the title. Like at the end of the day, if it's not easy for people, right, then we're failing, and we need to own that.
So is there somebody there that you guys that's been through your system that might be helpful? A person that's experienced the system to kind of show you how they walk through the system. I don't know. I'm just throwing out some ideas.
Lots of experiences to draw from.
Yeah.
Yes, we got a lady we just put in a hotel for a week. I'm sure she could tell you what went wrong or whatever.
I don't know if that's something you want to do. Like if you guys Polly needs that right now, but that might be something to kind of talk about as you guys are, because so basically what you're doing is reevaluating your reevaluating your coordinated entry system, or you guys are doing what HUD requires, is you're just doing an evaluation of your coordinated entry at this point, right?
Yeah.
So if you're
Yep.
saying, if changes need to be made, you're trying to get those changes for this year. Got it.
Absolutely.
So you're not
Total
really starting from scratch,
quality
you guys.
improvement.
Yeah, so I don't want to say you're starting from scratch then. You're just evaluating how your system is and you're trying to tweak it. And that's what Polly's here for, right?
Yeah.
That sounds like what you guys are trying to do, right?
Polly is here to help us. Let me be real clear, because Polly is not here as a consultant working with continuous quality improvement. Polly is here working, like the intention and purpose of this meeting was to talk about the function of the HARA with regard to the governance charter that has been drafted, that
Okay,
is open for comment.
got you.
So
Okay,
being sure about that function, because when we talk about an RFP, how can you issue an RFP if you don't have clarity regarding the roles and responsibility and the function? Because if there's not clarity in function, there can be clarity in evaluation.
true. Gotcha.
And
And so
I
that's
would
where the
also-
part of the HARA process that we got is kind of not clear for you guys because it doesn't really talk about the structure of how you guys are set up. So that's where the confusion is, right? I think I figured out.
Yeah.
what you guys
And
are
that's why
doing.
when Polly went to do, when we talked about not what necessarily is, but what is the funder saying the function of the HARA is? And I
Right.
know we had you a couple of winters ago come in and do an in-service, right?
Mhm.
About the role of the HARA, because there was some concern, right?
Mhm.
About how the HARA was functioning. We want to be sure, like, this is not ambiguous. It's not gray. Like the nuance of how it's executed, there may be some variation, but
Right,
the role, the
Right.
HARA does this, this, and this. And because once we have that responsibility locked in, then we can create clear evaluations. And if something else is needed, we can tweak and adjust, but we've got to have some stability in the structure of the COC and of the governance of the COC.
okay, so that goes back to some of the things we do have in our policy, like project-based vouchers and things like that, because I think right now, I don't think the HARA is the only one doing, I don't think the HARA does all that. Isn't that a role that Metro has took on during this transition? So I see what you mean. Okay, so
No,
it
the
is some
HARA
things-
is doing the project-based voucher applications and sending them in.
who you see, okay, so who put them
Because
on
in
the
the
wait list?
past, you had the HCV and the PVV exclusively.
Right, but last I knew, see, that's where there's some misconception there, because last I knew, Misty, before you came on board, the person who was doing the project-based voucher was Metro.
It
That's
was
we had a
also
whole meeting. We had a whole meeting about it. And so if that's changed, then you are taking on more roles that we have specified. So now I see where there's a lot of confusion because some roles are being done and some roles aren't, right? In our policy.
Mhm.
Okay, so
And I
I'm
think
getting
what
better
has
understanding.
happened,
Michelle, I
I
just
think-
want to clarify, like there's a function, there is a provision for funding for the HARA as for coordinated entry, correct?
We don't have any, we don't have a, no, let me say.
There's
that.
no funding?
For coordinated entry, but we
Okay.
do allow for, we did allow for some funding with the ESG CV because we had that additional money. And so we allowed, I think, for some funding for coordinated entry through ESG CV, but for our regular yearly ESG, we don't have no funding for that. But that's not to say that you can't use like a function of the coordinated entry in ESG, but because our funding is so limited, like we have 30% can only go to shelter. We have 40% has to go to the HARA. So you really don't have much left, but you can add some of that for like access or assessment, which I think that's what Metro got it for assessment under ESG CV for some of our outreach, I think. I can't remember, Tracy will probably have to clarify me on that one, but yeah, it's a bigger picture because sometimes, I'm going to be honest, sometimes our rules kind of conflict when we are allowing other things to happen. So what we're saying on paper looks different. And I think that's where your confusion is as far as the HARA role about the assessment of centralized intake. So I see where Vicki was questioning me about that yesterday. It is kind of confusing based on how your system is set up and based on the role right now that's going on. I know Misty is saying that now they do project-based vouchers, but at one point Metro was doing it. There's no funding for that, right? That's just a role. We just say when you're doing assessments, you should assess people for whatever is there are available to them, HCV, project-based vouchers. But because everyone is not flowing through the HARA, they're flowing through coordinated entry. The HARA can't do all that unless that referral is given to them to do that. So I think that's where Misty's saying now they're doing that role. Is that correct, Misty?
No, I was actually designated by Andrew Spritzy from MISTA, and I'm on the documentation he just recently sent out. As when I was with Street Outreach, I was the person that was doing the paperwork and sending it in. And we have a whole list of people. Metro, Antoinette was on there. And then I was the other person, and Tamara Chambers from the HARA used to be on there. Now I've been replaced as far as Street Outreach and over the HARA as that designated person.
Right. But that was because at first you were at GCYC. So you were outreach, right? So now that you came over to, so you got to remember you were outreach at that point. It was not at the HARA at that point. It was
Right,
at
but it's
outreach.
been switched.
But
since.
now you're at the HARA. And so now you doing it still for outreach in the HARA now, right? Is that the role now? You're doing it for the HARA, for just outreach, and now you're
Just
at the HARA.
HARA.
You're doing. Okay.
Just HARA.
So someone else is doing it now for outreach?
No, I don't think there's anybody on there from outreach anymore. And typically they didn't never do that before. There just wasn't anybody to do it at the time. And I was already helping with it. So, because Metro doesn't see our people in person, or at that time they weren't. I don't know if they are now.
Right.
I was. So it was easier for me to do the paperwork and get it scanned and emailed in.
Okay, that's good. I mean, I'm not knocking it. I just want to understand. So, you know,
So
that's
I
how
do-
you.
I want to drive this
Michelle, I
point
think
home
that
though,
that-
because this is
Michelle,
why
that's
we
what
need
happens.
roles.
Exactly. And so that's what happens in our community, right? Someone's not either able to or is
Right.
not willing to turn on a certain function, and then another agency does it. So typically Street Outreach would not have acted as the lead
Right.
agency for those particular properties and done the project-based voucher application.
Right.
But because there was no one to do it,
That's
Misty
how
was
Misty
willing
did
to
it.
take that on. And so
Right.
that's exactly what we're trying to get away from, and to really say, if the HARA is responsible for this and they're funded to do this, then let's have them do this.
Okay.
If there's a
gotcha.
deviation from that, we need to note that deviation and as a special case, not as an ongoing thing that we're going to do. The same
Right.
thing with coordinated entry. If coordinated entry should be at the HARA and that's what community decides, so be it, fine. But we need to acknowledge and recognize that the reason, as you stated before, that it was at Metro was because there was not a provider to do that function.
Right.
They took on that function and it was intended to be a temporary role. And so we just need to, if we have those nuances and those changes from our processes and procedures, we need to document that, note that, and then have a timeline for getting that function back to the agency that it should be at. And I think
okay. Okay.
so
Okay.
everybody's kind of doing stuff that's not within their responsibilities, and
Okay.
it's kind of convoluted the whole system. So now, when you say it's not that we don't know what's going on, it's on paper, it says one thing. We've had to
Right.
deviate from that for a very valid and good reason. And then at no point do we really come back to how it was intended or supposed to be. And so things have gotten a little bit convoluted. And I think the other thing to note is we have what our policies and procedures say. And then I think Angela articulated it, you have the client experience.
Yeah.
But then in addition to that, you have what others within the CoC think it should be, right? And we're trying to reconcile all of those opinions and all of those
Okay.
perspectives to this is what folks are contracted or funded to do, making sure that they have the capacity and the ability to perform that function. And kind of also if there's deviations from that, then we need to figure that out. So lots to reconcile. There's a lot.
Well, thank you for that, because I kind of was trying to understand really where you guys were going with it. And I think I didn't want it to be like, well, if the HARA don't do it, then the funding's going to be gone. You know what I mean? I wanted to get a full picture. It sounds like you guys are just trying to figure out what is required of the HARA. And I could be late, I'm sorry. What is required? And you guys are willing, if you need to make a change, to make it where it's supposed to be. But this is just a way of you guys just trying to evaluate everything. So I just don't want to come across as I'm trying to make you guys change your system. So that's what my biggest thing was. I have a thing about letting the CoC decide what they want instead of me saying, this is what you will do. That's not how I work with my community. So thank you for that information. For me, it's more clarity, essence of what you guys are really looking to do. I thought you guys wanted the same system, the way you have it and nobody wanted to change anything, and I didn't want to come in and say, you need to change it. So if you guys are open to, this is Mishta's role, right? This is what Mishta is requiring in our policy, but if you guys continue the way you are, it's okay as well, right? So I'm not saying you have to change anything, but when we wrote our policy, it was based on the HARA and coordinated entry being in the same location. Okay,
Well,
so
we
I hope
wanna
that
be
helps a
sure-
little bit.
That is very helpful. We want to be sure. So just like Misty mentioned, right? So she's doing the project-based vouchers now because, and HCV, right? She's got experience doing
Right.
that. What I personally, my pet peeve is that I don't want information beholden to one individual.
Right.
Right? So if the HARA is functioning as the agency that's providing referrals, then I want to ensure that they're clear about that expectation, that internally there's a process in place so that there aren't silos. We
Mhm.
all experience turnover, right? So we need to think progressively so that when we do have turnover or someone's on vacation, the entity contracted for those roles and responsibilities ensures that they continue to happen beyond an individual person within that organization.
Yeah.
In our community, that is where we have seen the biggest falls drops and the most variation in the quality of services provided is when we have turnover.
Yeah.
I agree, Angela.
I
And the
agree
question
totally.
I have is, who really's got the money that's supposed to be doing this? Because I know Misty took that on, but I don't see where there's any money to back up the coordination of that project.
There
Well, I
is
can
never
tell you
money
there's-
for project-based
there's never
vouchers and
money.
HCVs.
No,
I
there's
mean,
not
it's
money for
always
the-
rested with the HARA because
Mhm.
there's not money for the case management aspect of it.
So MISTA does have one in our ESG policy. We do allow for funding, and it's under rapid rehousing case management for HCV project-based voucher, because that role is at the HARA. That's part of your case management. And we do have that in our funding. That's why that role is at the HARA, because they have the money for the funding for that. Now, when new developments come to your community, I put this plug out there to you guys, talk to them to see if they'll give you a little bit of case management for that. As you know, it's not, that's just where Mr. kind of asks you to work with whoever that developer is, that's interested in doing a development, if they're willing to give you a little bit of money. But majority of the time, there's really not a lot of funding for that, because there's really not any case management that's done by the HARA. Is just adding people to the wait list, which is part of your intake process. Again, that's if everything was done at the HARA. The intake process, when you evaluate someone for programs, you're evaluating for anything they're available for. And so you would put them on all these different wait lists. And so that's why, and let me go back for a minute, because I just want to make sure this is why I was confused, because I know Misty talks about that she took the role on when she was outreach. We have to remember she was not with HARA. So HARA did not have the role. It was outreach who had it, because Misty worked for there. For now that she's back at the HARA, now that's why the HARA has it. And it's important to let other people know how to do that and how to do this function, because if Misty decides one day to leave, then again, the HARA is left with no one to do it again. So that is important, that other people know how to put people on a wait list. Right now, we have a couple codes that Misty has, that someone else has with HCV over there, and that both of them should be able to put people on the project-based voucher wait list. It shouldn't be.
And they are.
Well, actually, the project-based voucher doesn't have a code for that. Just for HCV, they should be able to send those referral over to whoever the housing agent is. I think it's Eric at Becca. So, just making sure that, I totally agree about cross training, because when people leave, it just leaves agencies without someone to do something, and that will happen, because the only person that really understands HCV and the project base is Misty over there. So, just making sure that someone else is a backup there when she's gone.
There is.
If you guys,
There's two other people, Michelle.
I mean, that's good. I'm just making a statement of what has happened in the past. And it's just not here. I've seen it in all my other communities. If someone leaves that's really doing everything, that agency is kind of in a pinch, because people can't get on the wait list. All those things happen. So I'm glad to see that, there is other people there. So I thank you guys for inviting me to the meeting. Vicki was the one who kind of told me about it, because it gives me more clarity on what you guys are trying to do, because I don't want to, like I said, I don't want to be the person to say, you got to change this process. But we do have this process, that we do have our requirements for the HARA. But if your process tweaks a little bit, just making sure you have it written as stated in your policy of why that's there, if it's temporary or permanent.
So Michelle, before you leave, the latest policy manual I have is dated May of 2019.
Oh, no, we have a new one that just came out. You want me to send it to you?
Yes,
I
please.
sent it to her yesterday, Polly.
Okay.
Okay.
I sent it to you yesterday.
I just
Okay.
wanted to make sure that I had the most recent one because I thought the last one came from Michelle just a couple of weeks ago. So good.
Mm-mm.
So do you have in writing the role or what you expect from our current HARA, Michelle?
Yes, all that's in our policy.
Well, but you already told us we don't match the policy exactly.
Yeah, we
So
don't, I mean,
here's
that's
my-
our policy. If you want to tweak from it, I don't have anything to say, you can change this and this. Is that what you mean?
No, I'm saying, well, yeah, yes and no. You're saying, I'm talking about if an individual leaves also. So for example, if you leave, you're telling us that we deviate from the policy and it's okay with you. But do we have that in writing and is it okay? And where do we fit in the policy? And you know, what if you leave and somebody says, oh, well, you're not doing it right, we're taking your funding.
No.
I don't think we have
Okay.
any coverage that I've seen that says, we understand you're doing it this way, it's okay with us.
Well, when you send me the updated current coordinated policy, when you guys update or your current policy, we approved your current coordinated entry policy, right?
I don't
So
know. What is our current coordinated policy and what?
is that what you mean?
When is it dated? I mean,
I don't know. I can look. Hold on one second.
if you have any policies, that would be really helpful. to me, 'cause
2019.
It sounds like somebody sent you something and it was all approved, but nobody can tell me what that thing is.
I have a coordinated entry policy that was sent to me. I can check and tell you. We have it with our new. Trace. Let me see if she sent it with. I think she sent it with the last application. I can get that to you and send it to you, the last one I have on file. When we just changed over the HARA process, that happened about last year, where we had during COVID, the HARA changed. So we allowed for some relaxation because they were just getting up and running and then the pandemic hit. So we just been allowing the policy allowing the system the way it is. We haven't said it was right or wrong.
So
We just said it was okay. The coordinated entry system policy was okay.
Okay, well, if you send me what you have and then
Okay.
if you have any clue that COVID is under control and we're going back to something that's more black and white,
No.
no.
Again, we
So-
allow for deviation. So once you submit the updated policy of how the community is gonna work, then we will approve or deny. But basically, we don't deny unless it's absolutely no coordinated entry. As long as you got a system and it's spelled out what you're gonna do, we allow for it. We don't say anyone has a wrong coordinated entry system.
And you have that then? You have what
What do
we
you mean?
said as a.
Oh,
community?
yeah, I have what you said.
Okay, so yeah, if you'd send that to me, that would be helpful. That can help us.
But it's
start-
not gonna show the ins and outs of the system, I don't think. I haven't got anything telling me, I think it is in the policy where Metro is a coordinated entry system. Is that what you mean?
Anything you have in writing that says Mishta's happy with the way Genesee County is doing its.
We haven't sent anything like that.
Housing assessment will be helpful.
Oh, Polly, we don't have anything like that. We just take the policy and if we have any problems, we address it. We don't
Okay.
sit back and say your coordinated entry system is approved. We haven't done that. We just take your policy when you send it to us because you guys are a direct applicant of HUD. We just take your policy and make sure we have it because we have to have it on file. If there's something that need to be tweaked in that policy, we'll address that. I think I did when they first started the policy. I sent something, it's been over a year or so ago, 2 years. I think when coordinated entry first started. So if anything changed, I don't formally send something to say your coordinated entry is approved. Is that what you mean? I don't have anything like that.
Yeah, just for Polly's understanding. So when the annual application is submitted, if there was an issue with anything in that packet, whether it's policy, procedures, eligibility requirements, things like that,
Mhm.
then your award would not be funded. So
Right.
it's like an assumption of acceptance because you received the fiscal award.
Right,
Okay,
Right.
So that contract solidifies your structure.
right.
okay, so can I see whatever it is we sent in that we said we were gonna do that?
Oh,
you're
the
not
policy.
funded?
I can just send you the policy. I don't know. I think somebody there could just send you the policy. That's all I'm gonna send you. I'm not gonna send you anything that Mishta wrote and said is approved. If we approve the application, which is the grants, they have a grant agreement now, so it was approved. Is that what you're asking me for? Because that's the only approval I would have. The
I
grant.
would I'd like to know exactly what you have. Yeah, so the
Okay.
data policy from you says you have it and you know it.
Okay,
And then the grant application was submitted by Catholic Charities.
and the grant agreement is through Catholic Charities, and they have it.
I've seen the grant agreement, but it doesn't say much except you're gonna follow the rules, make the reports.
That's how it is.
Money.
Mhm.
I want to know what they said they were gonna do, the actual work that you
So
guys,
you want to see the application as it was submitted.
I
So
guess.
ask them to just download the PDF.
if that's what we're working from and what Mr. said is okay enough to give us money and what we're supposed to be doing. Yeah,
I
I'd like
guess, I just want you to understand that our application doesn't ask them about their process. Only we just ask them if you updated your coordinated entry policy to send it to us. We don't ask like, tell us step by step your process, because we're hoping you're following your coordinated entry policy. So only thing I'm gonna send you is the updated coordinated entry policy if I got that. If they did not send me an updated policy, that means nothing was updated. So we're taking their last policy that they have, which that would be through Metro, because they submit on behalf of the CoC.
okay, well, that would be helpful just to know what that is.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
Mhm. I hope I explained that. So just so you know, you won't see anything in the actual application, like having them describe their process to us.
But Metro submitted that, right? So Metro knows what they said they're gonna do?
Metro submit the
Why
application.
do not all know this? I mean, I'm just confused.
Yeah, I think you're thinking in our application, we ask questions about their process. The application asks nothing about the process. We just ask them about the money, how they're gonna spend it, those kind of questions. If you're looking for the policy, that's the only thing we ask for. If you update your coordinated entry policy, you send it to Mishta with your application. We didn't get an updated policy, so that means that policy wasn't updated last year. If it had, all I can do is send you the last policy I have that also Metro would have, as well as with a CoC, whoever's a CoC person that has the coordinator would have that information.
Well,
But
would
I
you-
can send you the last
Thank you.
policy that I have to date, if that's what you want.
That'll
Because if
do.
you're looking for an actual policy, I don't have anything else but that.
Okay, whatever you've got. would be-
Okay, all right. I just want to make sure you understand, we don't have like an actual step-by-step
Okay.
process. Okay.
And so with
Got
that, we are at 10:46.
Okay.
It has been a really good conversation. I think a lot came out that is helpful for context for everybody on the call. You know, as always, we end up with more questions than we have answers for. But I think it's been a good dialogue and good conversation. If you happen to have any other questions about the HARA function as part of the as part of the governance charter, please feel free to email Polly, or you can send an email to the governance email as well. We want you to definitely save the date for the last two sessions. One of them is on Friday about the lead agency, HMIS, and collaborative applicant. And then on Wednesday, the 12th, is performance evaluation and continuity. And the link is the same for all of the meetings, and we start at 9:30 a.m. Thank you for your participation today. Today's session has been recorded, so you'll be able to go back to it. And then I know that there probably will be some additional offline conversations and meetings as a result of some of the things that were brought up today. Ultimately, folks, we just really want to get this right so that we don't have to do it again anytime soon. This has been a long process, and we're doing our due diligence to try and make sure that we produce a charter that makes sense for our community and that clarifies things and not confuses them. So thanks for your participation today. Hope you have a good rest of your day.